risk management standards. This is a little bit of supplemental material. It covers, in general, what the text also covers in the same topic, but I figured I'd go into it in a little bit more depth here and, pull it aside as a separate topic. Standards defined. What is a standard? A standard could be one of two things. It's either criteria for evaluating whether a process was performed successfully, a standard of quality, was it done right, or it's criteria for approval or certification from a governing body. If you follow the standards in a second sense, you get an approval or certification indicating your standards compliant. Standards may be enforced by laws or government regulation or even by non-governmental trade entities. Standards don't have to be something that's enforced by regulation. They can be enforced by a consensus of the industry, so to speak. And in standards may be the accepted best practices, and they don't necessarily require formal enforcement. So you can have a standard that, say, specifies things must be done a certain way, and there's no body enforcing it, but it's still a good idea to follow the standard because it indicates you're following best practices. Some standards organizations here. The ISO-IEC, the International Organization for Standardization, the ISO, and the International Electrotechnical Commission, IEC. ISO is an international standard-setting body composed of representatives of various national standards organizations, and the IEC is involved with this in certain cases. ANSI, the American National Standards Institute. The Institute is the official U.S. representative to the major international standards organizations, ISO, International Standards Organization, and IEC, what we just mentioned. So it's the U.S. representative to ISO-IEC. The IEEE, the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers. IEEE standards affect a wide range of industries, including power and energy, biomedical, healthcare, information technology, telecommunication, transportation, information assurance, and many more. It's everything from power systems to microtechnology. The IETF is the Internet Engineering Task Force. They develop and promote voluntary Internet standards, in particular standards that compromise the protocol suite TCP/IP. IETF defines standards for things like HTTP, the standard for the webs in general. NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, was known between 1901 and 1988 as the National Bureau of Standards. It's a measurement standards laboratory run by the U.S. government. It's also known as the National Meteorological Institute, a non-regulatory agency of the United States Department of Commerce. So NIST is part of the Department of Commerce. It sets standards for the U.S. government, and it has a certain amount of authority within the U.S. government. FIPS is the Federal Information Processing Standard. FIPS are publicly announced standards developed by the U.S. federal government for use in computer systems by all non-military government agencies and by government contractors. FIPS pronouncements are oftentimes modified versions of standards used in other technical communities. For example, ANSI standards, IEEE, ISO standards, etc. The purpose of FIPS is to ensure that all federal government agencies adhere to the same guidelines regarding security and communication. And again, this is non-classified stuff because the classified stuff falls under a whole different category. So here we have a spectrum of organizations. The stuff we'll be most concerned with in this class are ISO, IEC, NIST, and FIPS. NIST in particular, we're going to be using their standards for risk analysis in our class project. What's a framework? Okay, we've talked about standards organizations. Now we're getting into the minutia of some of the terms here. A framework. It's a way of organizing facts about a system or an organization to derive its basic underlying structure. It's a way of organizing reality to figure out what it means and how to work with it. It's a risk framework is a way to categorize and organize the components that make up risks to IT systems. So it's a way to understand the pieces that, when put together, tell you something about the risk to IT systems, how you can define these risks, and how you can best manage these risks. Frameworks define terms and logic, but do not typically specify content. A framework is like a language. It's got a grammar and a syntax, but you can say whatever you want in that language. And the same thing with a framework. A framework allows you to make statements. In this case, a risk framework allows you to make statements about the security risks within a particular system or organization or project, but it doesn't tell you exactly what you should do with those risks. Now, there are some risk management frameworks here, and you may notice some of the initial acronyms being very familiar from a couple slides back. ISO 27005, the International Standards Organization, part of the 27000 series, and this is a particular one dealing with IT security risk. NIST SP 830. This is the National Institute of Standards and Technology Standard for Risk Analysis. FAIR. Octave, which is a standard presented by the Software Engineering Institute under Carnegie Mellon. It's more of a methodology than a framework, but I put it here as a framework because it also works as one. And in FIPS 199-200, this is actually two FIPS standards, 199 and 200, but they come together. Yeah, they work closely in collaboration because they concern similar sorts of things. They cover classification of federal data that is not national security relevant. National security relevant data has its own standards, having nothing to do with NIST. FIPS 199-200 works closely with NIST SP 830. Its use is mandated by FISMA, the Federal Information Security Management Act, or whatever, that says federal agencies operating in the civilian sector, get your act together as far as security. What's a program? A program is an initiative that defines policies and develops processes to support an activity, like risk management, making up an organizational initiative. So it's something that supports goals within an organization, a collection of activities that support a specific type of goal in an organization. And in this case, we're talking about risk management, so you may have a risk management program in your organization that defines a policy and has the processes, which involve projects and operations and management things and so forth, that support risk management. A program may consist of projects. A project is a time-bounded, structured set of activities to support a single goal or deliverable. And I emphasize time-bounded because things that extend indefinitely aren't projects, no matter what anyone tells you. It has to have a set time frame for completion. That time frame may be approximate, may be subject to revision, but it's got to be something that ends. If it doesn't end, it's not a project. Projects always end. Or it can consist of operations. These are things that never end, by definition, because they're ongoing procedures to perform regular tasks. An information security program consists of the following. You identify risk events, you assess risk, and you develop risk mitigation strategies, including planning, implementation, operation, and evaluation of the effectiveness of your mitigation. You're figuring out where the risks are, you're mitigating the risks, you're developing strategies to mitigate the risks, and you're seeing how well do these strategies work. And then overall, you have to manage the resources to keep doing this. You have to operate within a budget, you have to operate within constraints on hiring staff, on using other organizational resources, and so forth. So the tricky thing about a program is you have to do all this stuff, you have to constantly monitor whether you're doing the right stuff, and you have to do so under the constraint of a budget. Now, when we talk about frameworks, the ISO 27000 series covers a lot of information security stuff. It's a comprehensive introduction to information security risk management and management practices. The ISO 27000 series consists of multiple documents, multiple standards. These include 27001, which is the requirements for an information security management system. Basically, how to do information security right within an organization. 27002 identifies controls to address information security risk exposures. 27003 is the implementation guidelines for 27001. It's how to do 27001. 27001 tells you what you should do. 27003 tells you how to do it. 27004 is the information security management measurements, the metrics for determining security management. And then lastly, 27005 is the Guidelines for Information Security Risk Management. 27005 is designed to assist the satisfactory implementation of information security based on a risk management approach. It doesn't specify, recommend, or even name any specific risk analysis method. It's a true framework. Use whatever method you want. Though it does specify that you have to have a structured, systematic, and rigorous process from evaluating risks to creating the risk treatment plan. In the class here, we're going to be dealing primarily with 27005 and in with 27001. 27001 is the most famous of these. This is a standard by which organizations become certified, and 27005 is, of course, immediately relevant to risk management. Now, 27001, it's the criteria for the management and administration of security. It's not a technical standard. It's an administrative standard. It's how you manage your information security program. If you are an organization, you can be certified compliant with this standard by a qualified third-party audit. Security management standard specifies best practices. So it looks at the various aspects and areas of information security management and says, here are what the best practices are. In order to be certified, you require an evaluation of the risks. This is risk-driven. You start the certification process by saying, here are what the security risks are. Then, here are the controls necessary to address these risks. And then, we have a management system that ensures the control satisfies the organization's needs. ISO 27001 started out as the British standard BS 7799, which was a British standard for information security management. The ISO 27001 process is governed by a risk assessment. The security controls must be based on effective response to the risks identified. A lot of organizations have gone through the trouble of being 27001 certified because it's meaningful in the world out there to have an organization that has a certification. Amazon Web Services, for example, is one of the organizations that's 27001 compliant. Their website provides a good, readable introduction to the process and the value of certification. If you want to find out more about the practical implementation of 27001, go to Amazon Web Services and look at their certification. Here's what 27001 covers: security policy, security organization, how you structure the organization of the security process, how you classify your assets and control your assets based on classification, personnel security, how you manage the human resources within your organization for security purposes, physical and environmental security, gates, guns, and guards, as they're sometimes called, computer and network security, the technical stuff, system access controls, system development and maintenance, the process of developing systems and maintaining them, business continuity planning, what happens if there's a disaster, how do you keep your business running, and then lastly, compliance, how do you ensure that you're compliant with the various standards and so forth. Now the NIST standards, there's a bunch of NIST standards that have something to do with risk management and security. We're going to cover a few of these, but we're only going to focus on one or two of them in the class. 816 deals with training requirements. It's actually only marginally concerned with security, but if you're a federal government agency, your security training and your training in risk management has to follow this standard. SP 830, Risk Management Guide for Information System Technology. You're going to become very familiar with this by the time you're done with this class. It's the process by which the class project will follow. SP 839, Managing Risk from Information Systems. It's a guide for applying the risk management framework to federal information systems, establishes a risk management framework process that promotes the concept of near real-time risk management through the implementation of a robust continuous monitoring process. God, these guys are full of themselves. SP 853, Recommended Security Controls, another good one. Of these, SP 830 is the most essential for our purposes. We will be following this one. Now here's some more detail about SP 830. It's an overview of risk management. It's how the risk management fits in a system development life cycle. So, you're developing a system, and this isn't just, writing specifications and code. This is a whole process of putting the system in place, procuring the hardware, procuring the resources, setting up the organizational infrastructure to support the system. It's a risk assessment methodology, including risk mitigation and a risk management program. The special publications in the 800 series present documents of general interest to the computer security community, so SP 800 stuff is good for all of us. Mitigation involves the prioritization, evaluating, and implementing the appropriate risk-reducing controls and countermeasures that you get from your risk management process. The management program is the program and supporting processes to manage information security risk. Remember, we talked about programs a bit earlier. It includes establishing the context for risk-related activities, assessing risk, responding to risk, and monitoring risk over time. The NIST document has a comprehensive and comprehensible glossary defining security risk terms. Just because it's a U.S. government standard doesn't mean it's not a valuable document. This thing is actually pretty well written and very relevant to those of us who aren't part of the federal government community. Now, FIPS 199-200 is a FISMA mandate, meaning that this act that was passed requiring that civilian federal government agencies follow certain security standards mandates that you follow the FIPS 199-200. It establishes security categories, which is information classification. What information requires more protection? What is more sensitive? What is less? It evaluates the information based on confidentiality, integrity, and availability. The classic CIA triad that you need to know if you're going to pass a CISSP, and even if you're not, you need to know it to become a security professional. It establishes categories of potential impact. It defines what low, moderate, and high mean for each of the CIA categories. So, it's a standard. It sets ground rules. If somebody says this has got a low impact in terms of confidentiality, you know what that means because FIPS defines that. And the triplet is the category. It's part of Title III of the E-Government Act entitled the Federal Information Security Management Act, or FISMA, of 2002, and it tasks NIST with responsibilities for developing information security standards and guidelines, including minimum requirements for federal information systems. FISMA, if you must know, is officially Public Law, or PL 107-347. That's an obscure fact. And that's it. Thank you.